So we have a real treat today to get to visit with several different people who have had their fertility impacted by necessary medical treatments and have undergone one kind or another of fertility preservation. And as I said, this for me is the thing that motivates the things that we do every day. And I have to tell all of you how impactful what you have your messages that you have to share with us are to all of us in the room. So what I'd like to do is just, first of all, introduce you, and I'll just come down the table starting from the far end and working this way, and just ask you to tell your stories in whatever way that you want to tell the story. And I can't wait to hear. So our first patients, and including as advocates, are Megan and Mike Shearer. And Mike, why don't you get us started off here?
Sure. I hate having to go first. So I was diagnosed with testicular cancer at age 26. Megan and I, we were married at the time for 3 years, which I think is really important. We were married young. We were high school sweethearts. We'd been together forever. So at 23, we figured we could commit to each other at that point. The reason I say that us being married was really important was because when I was preparing for surgery after my diagnosis, I was not going to bank. My doctor recommended it, told me I should do that. There were so many things going on at the time and so many thoughts in my head and so many different appointments to make and so many different places to go that I didn't want to add another one to the list. I think that's also important to understand that where I was treated, I had to go to a different place to bank and make my own appointments. I wasn't going to do it. But like all of the good decisions I've made in my adult life, Megan is behind them. And I believe when I was explaining to her that I wasn't going to bank and here's why, her exact words to me were, "Are you an idiot?" So I realized I was being an idiot, and I went and banked. I went through surgery. I wanted to avoid a lymph node dissection at all costs. I just was not interested in that surgery after having my tumor removed. Luckily, I could go on surveillance. Unfortunately, after being on surveillance for a while, the cancer had spread to my lymph nodes. Was again counseled by a different oncologist to bank prior to chemotherapy. I did that. I didn't have to talk to Megan this time. Went through chemotherapy just fine, and a few years after treatment, we decided it was time to start a family. So we tried for a while on our own. It was clear that it was not working. So we were basically on our own at that point. That's how we felt. We made an appointment with Megan's OB/GYN, who referred us to a reproductive endocrinologist. So we started working with an RAI at that time, and we had decided that IVF wasn't for us. We wanted to pursue IUIs. Unfortunately, and we had discovered this when I started banking, my sperm counts were very low and my motility was very low, even before surgery. We still went through.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Was this before any chemotherapy treatment too?
It was just before chemo, and yes. So they did not change after surgery, and it remained pretty low after chemo as well. I still had sperm. In conversations with the REI, that was important. It takes one. But we pursued IUIs, and we actually used all of my frozen sperm mixed with fresh sperm in IUIs 5 and 6. Nothing had worked up to that point. 5 and 6 didn't work, so I no longer had any banked sperm. I'm going to try and make this short at this point. We started to investigate adoption. We had picked an adoption agency, and Megan, again, making a good decision, said, let's do one more IUI. Let's just try. We know we're going to pursue adoption. And we have a 6-year-old son. I do remember the REI before our 7th IUI said, this likely isn't going to work. Right before they did the procedure, my sperm count was very low. I'm pretty sure she even asked us if we wanted to go through with it while we were there. We did, and it worked. We have a lovely 6-year-old son. He is the light of our lives. A few years after that, we decided to try and have another child, so we actually went straight to IVF. I got smart at that point, and I said, I'm going to go talk to some urologists and see if there's something I can do for my sperm counts. And so I started to be treated for testosterone. I took Clomid, and it actually increased my testosterone. My sperm counts actually got worse. Yeah. We did IVF with ICSI in 2019. It did not work. At that point, we decided rather than continue to try and build our family, we were thrilled to have one. We wanted to help as many people as we could that were in a similar situation. So we started Worth the Wait, which we'll talk about a little later.
So before going to that, Megan, there must be a Megan side of this story.
Of course there is. So I think during this time of about 2.5 years of going through infertility treatments, cancer was very difficult for us to get through as a couple, but infertility, and I think Mike would agree with this too, infertility was harder because we had already dealt with the burden of cancer at 26, all of our friends were going to Europe and having all these wonderful adventures, and we were trying to decide who was going to take Mike for his chemo infusion for that day. And then to have to deal with infertility, and I got to a point where I was getting baby shower invites all the time, and I just started saying, no, I can't come to the baby shower. It was too hard. So that isolation and just the emotional burden was really overwhelming. And I think in the moment when I look back, I wish I would have had support. Like during our procedures, we kept saying but he has cancer, or he had cancer, don't you want to factor that in? And they're like, well, yeah, but look at your AMH and look at this and look at that. And we're like, yeah, but don't we need to look at the overall picture to try to figure out why this isn't working? So we just wanted that baby so bad, and once he was here, we realized why he was worth fighting for, and we were so grateful that IUI finally worked.
And your experience caused you guys to establish a charity called Worth the Wait, and so maybe we can kick up the slides now, and you can tell us about that, and I'll give you the controller.
Thank you.
So I'll just push the green button to advance the slide.
Great, thanks. So after getting through all of our infertility, having our son, COVID happened right before his 3rd birthday. And we were locked together, ready to kill each other, locked up. And we had no preschool, no daycare, no anything. And we sat down one night and we were like, what can we do to make this world a better place? And we thought, we've been fortunate in our situation. Well, we had absolutely no insurance coverage. We spent over $100,000 trying to have our son, and then going through the IVF that didn't work. We thought, what can we do to pay it forward? So we were just going to set aside a little bit of money every month and maybe try to find somebody who was a cancer patient in need to help. And Mike, through work, he has an attorney friend who said, you know what, this sounds like a bigger idea. This sounds like it could be a nonprofit. So he set up a 501c3 for us. And we just took it from there. We had some really generous friends and family in the beginning who contributed. And I have a background in marketing, so I set up some social media, set up a website, and off we went. We gave our first grant 3.5 months later. and it went to a couple in Ohio, also a testicular cancer survivor, adopting a baby girl. So it just felt like such a serendipitous moment for us. And since that time, we have given 67 grants to people in 23 different states, and Sasha up here on the screen is one of the people that we helped this year. She really had a unique situation. She was diagnosed with a blood cancer in her 20s and actually had an opportunity to freeze embryos, not eggs, all embryos. Ended up not being with that partner anymore. Now she's in her mid to late 30s, diagnosed with breast cancer. And she came to us in, everyone that we work with is in such dire straits. When we talk about what our experience was like, their experience is that times 50. People are having problems paying for gas to get to their REI. People are looking at not having a job because they have to go through their cancer treatment. So our work is really focused on helping those who are very underserved, and Sasha was just one of those people. And so we were able to give her a grant to help her just do eggs this time. And so those are on ice now, and she's doing her treatment for her breast cancer. But I just love the quote that she shared with us about, how she feels less alone, because I think we wish we would have had somebody there holding our hands through this process. And yes, we give grant money, but we also are always willing to pick up the phone and talk to patients who are struggling and just letting them know, it's going to be okay. There's a happy ending to your story. And then, now, I'm a marketing person, not a data person, but I felt like this audience might like some data. So I have some information here just about who we have been able to help in those 67 grants that we've given. I should also say that out of 67 grants, over 55 were this year alone. So our grant giving is up over 400%. So that's kind of what it looks like so far with the populations we've served. And then we are in Columbus, Ohio. And so there are several of you that we have worked with in Ohio and also beyond, helping your patients. So afterwards, if you're interested, I'd love to tell you more about how our grant application works if you feel like you have some patients that might benefit. But of course, Ohio is big. And then I don't know what's happening in New York. A lot of people are talking about us there and sharing our information. And then also for the types of cancer, we work exclusively with AYA. So up to age 39. Now, we have a debate every once in a while, what's the earliest age? We have given a grant to a 13-year-old who did egg freezing. We've also done a grant for ovarian tissue cryopreservation with Cleveland Clinic. So anyway, you can just see kind of what the makeup is.
You're in charge.
I also have this. If you want to find out more about us, our social media is down there, and give us a follow.
Well, great.
Sorry, I wanted to add, we also have 3 babies as a result of the grants, with 2 on the way. So I'm trying to take a page out of Dr. Orwig's book. I tell every couple that I get to name the child if it works. So still trying to, I'm just kidding.
Well, our next panelist is Jae-Won Shu. Jae-Won, you want to tell us your story?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Jae-Won Shu. I was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, bone cancer, when I was 11. That was, I think, nearly 14 years ago now. And being so young, in preparation for the chemotherapy, I had testicular tissue stored. And so in the meantime, I was treated at Children's National in DC. I underwent 29 rounds of chemotherapy, as well as a surgery to remove my femur where the tumor was, and replace it with the metal prosthesis. So if you see me on crutches, still some side effects of that lingering. I got older, obviously, and time passed, and I connected with Dr. Orwig to talk about the possibility of returning me my stored testicular tissue and see the potential of where I could go from there. So I'm very new to this entire scene. I think my story with fertility has just begun. I'm very excited to see where it will lead. I'm excited to see how I can contribute to the community. And really, I'm excited to see what happens. Yeah.
So a couple of notes. One, you're in Washington, D.C., but you traveled actually to Pittsburgh to freeze your tissues.
Right. When I was, pretty young, I think.
Yeah, you were young, yeah. And in those days, that's the only way we could do it. Everybody had to travel to Pittsburgh because it was the only place we were approved to do it. As you all heard today, now we collaborate with a lot of you around the country. And in fact, one of those places is Washington University, Children's National. So if it were today, you wouldn't have had to travel to Pittsburgh. You could have had your surgery there. Also, you said this is all new to you. It's new to everybody, because when we do this, it'll be the first time that testicular stem cells have been transplanted back into the testis. So you're really a pioneer, and we're all going to learn together about how the technique works, and what we learn along with you will be something that we can use to counsel next patients, optimize our methodologies, and hopefully we'll write that story together.
Yeah, it's good to be in company.
So if I didn't say it clearly, Magee-Women's actually coming in on Friday to have his cells transplanted back into his testis. And maybe final note, you and I talked about this, but your cancer circumstances, totally cured, survivor?
Yes, that's right. We're 13 years in remission.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
And just one more small interesting note. How does this artificial femur grow?
Right. So when I had the prosthesis put in, I was not done growing yet. So they have and I was telling Dr. Org, a sci-fi method of kind of getting it up to length to match my right leg. It involves magnets. It's about what I know, but today it looks like me on a hospital bed. They place a large ring-like machine around my leg, and they set a timer for 16 minutes in which 4 millimeters will expand a spring within the leg. This part is, for the most part, painless, completely outpatient, non-invasive. It's a lot better than the technology that we had when I was a bit younger, in which the same length would be covered within about 20 seconds, which my body really did not like. So this one is great. We do it about once a month. We try to see how my body feels about it. I'm left with just a bit of soreness, muscle fatigue, but we're close. We've been doing it for a few years now. Minor setbacks along the way, but I think give another year, I can get off these crutches.
Great. So our next panelist is Dania Kay. Can we hear your story?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dania. Thank you for having me. So my story started when I was 24. I was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was being treated at Memorial Sloan Kettering, living in New York City at the time. And unlike many cancer survivors I've met, I actually was presented with the option of freezing my eggs right before starting treatment. But it was an option, not a recommendation, because the cancer was found in an advanced stage. I was told I didn't have time, and that the standard treatment or chemotherapy treatment had a very low likelihood of impacting my fertility. So with the standard of care kind of being successful in like 90% of the cases, you kind of never think that you're going to be in the 10%. So I said, okay, let's go forward with the chemotherapy. 4 months later, I wasn't responding to the standard of care, and at that point, I had to pursue a more aggressive treatment. So I ended up going into a clinical trial and then had an autologous stem cell transplant at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Before moving to more aggressive treatment, I had a wonderful oncologist that had the foresight to tell me that there's this new thing, it's experimental, it's called ovarian tissue freezing, and if you want it done, it needs to be tomorrow. So basically what happened was I was told it was the only option to give me a chance at preserving my fertility. To me, it was a very, very quick decision, in part because there was not really any other option. And it was too important for me to have the option of becoming a mother to my own biological kids if I could have that chance. So I learned that my treatment wasn't working and I might die on the same day that I learned that I also had to have my ovary removed, which I think later presented a lot of complications with how I reacted to infertility treatment, because it was like I felt like I was going to die every time. Like the PTSD from that day was too intense. But the loss of fertility for me, I think, was the hardest part of the entire cancer journey. And it's also the most invisible part to everybody around you, in part because a lot of times you don't choose to share. In my case, I was very private about it. I didn't have a partner at the time. I didn't know who my future husband would be, if they would want this to be public. I also didn't know what it would mean. It was a very isolating and lonely process because nobody outside of my immediate family kind of knew what I was going through. And in retrospect, I probably would have been more open about it, but that was a decision that I took at the time. So I went ahead and did the ovarian tissue freezing that was done at Cornell, which was the partner for Memorial Sloan Kettering. I was told it was a very quick, simple procedure. The recovery was not quick and simple for me. And I think for those that are doing this procedure, I know that it's variability amongst patients, but I could not walk for a week. It was quite painful to kind of bend over and to recover from that. But once I did that, they were able to harvest my stem cells, and I moved forward to having my autologous stem cell transplant. So it was kind of in the back of my head, fast forward. Thankfully, I'm 10 years out in remission. Probably like 5 years after I'm done with my cancer treatment, I meet my husband. Always in the back of my head, don't know if I'll be able to have kids. When do I talk to him about this? How do I bring this up while I date? I don't want to date somebody that's not willing to have unconventional family building methods. Like, all of this is kind of like a cloud hanging over my head for many, many years, really anxious about whether I would be able to have kids, what the impact on my fertility would be, on my hormones after treatment. And ultimately, I found a wonderful partner who's my now husband, and told him pretty early on. He was luckily very open-minded, and I had scheduled my ovarian tissue transplant 6 months after we got married. I was doing a pre-consult with that doctor, and I decided, my husband gave me some good questions to ask, as like, what's your success rate with this and all this? And I'm talking to him, and he's like, oh, I've never done this on humans, only on rats. I was like, well, I will cancel this surgery. But in all seriousness, I know this is all experimental and new, but as a patient, it's very scary to be told that this has never been something that your doctor has done in surgery. And I think if I hadn't asked that, it might have not been disclosed. And I asked this doctor, if I was your daughter, who would you want to do the surgery? And that's when he referred me to some of the international known doctors that are presenting here at this event today. And that is actually an approach I took with many, many times across my cancer journey. When I was considering my clinical trial, I asked my oncologist, if I was your daughter, what would you recommend? I know doctors are obligated to present us with all options, but we also want, if we trust you, we want to hear your recommendations. And after that, I went through an academic journal hunt, where basically I researched every single name that my doctor had told me to see who are the doctors that have successfully transplanted ovarian tissue, how many cases have they done, what are their success rates? Because to me, like, this is my life. I don't get that many shots at this, and I want to go with someone who has the most experience. I ended up flying out to meet with 2 different doctors. I ended up having my ovarian tissue transplant with Dr. Silber. I had my tissue transported from Cornell to St. Louis. That was like a full-time job, all the paperwork, and ended up doing the surgery with him. And I was the one patient that was so anxious that he referenced this morning that I insisted on IVF. So I had been already trying to get pregnant with my husband for a few years. I was kind of an odd case where I went into menopause, but then kind of out of menopause, and different OBGYNs told me, oh, we see some follicles, your hormones look kind of normal. So we actually had an IVF round prior to the transplant that confirmed that my eggs were chemically damaged, and then decided to pursue the transplant after trying to get pregnant for a little bit. And so then I had that ovarian tissue transplant, and 7 months later, I did an IVF. And I needed the IVF for my anxiety, because I needed to know that the quality of my eggs were there. I wanted to know that if I was going to try to get pregnant for a few years, and that it might take a while, that I had a shot. I had already been emotionally drained from the fertility journey and impact of cancer. And so I just needed that for peace of mind. They were able to get 1 egg, 1 embryo, highest quality embryo, transferred it, and it didn't take. And I was absolutely devastated, because I felt like it was my one shot. But it did confirm that I had the egg quality that I needed to get pregnant, and I got pregnant naturally the following month. I now have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, 2 healthy kids, and I feel incredibly grateful. I still have half of my ovarian tissue stored at the St. Louis hospital, and I still have hormonal function, so I feel very lucky to be here. And thank you for all that you do in the oncofertility space, because really it's people like me that are really benefiting. And I forget that I'm in oncology, that I'm a cancer survivor, and that like my kids are miracles, because now it just feels like so normal that I have like these kids. And it's an important reminder that, it wasn't always that way. I had a lot of anxiety related to fertility, and it was a very, very long journey, and I feel very grateful to be here.
So just a couple of clarifying questions. I think you said you froze your ovarian tissue 10 years ago. That just gives us sort of a framework in terms of how early it was in the days of freezing ovarian tissues. And then your tissues were transplanted 3 years ago, is that right? Because you have a 3-year-old, or was it 4 years ago?
It was
or
2019 that I had my, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they're still functioning after all this time, which is terrific.
Yes, still functioning. And one thing that I think would be wonderful for patients is to be connected to other patients that have gone through this surgery, whether it's ovarian tissue freezing or transplantation. I remember asking for that, like, nobody had even heard of this procedure. I ended up being connected to one other patient through an oncology nurse in the survivorship program. And that person connected me to one of the doctors. But it was just so lonely to not know anyone who had even heard of this procedure or gone through it, and to be able to know what to expect from it. So I think just connecting, enabling those connections, I think would be really good. And also, most patients don't go through like an investigative process to find a doctor. It took me so much research and consults and calls. I flew out to different cities to consult with doctors to find someone that had done transplants. So I think as these centers do more tissue freezing, it would be wonderful to build a network of connections to those that are experiencing doing the transplants back for once those patients are ready to have.
That might be good advice to all of us.
Yeah.
I have one more question. So you froze some amount of ovarian tissue, and then it's time to transplant it back in, and I'm sure you must have had a discussion with Dr. Sober about how much tissue am I going to transplant. So can you give us an idea how much of the total was transplanted, how much remains, what was the discussion like, how did you decide how much to transplant?
Yeah. So the early discussion was, from my perspective, my two concerns was, am I reintroducing cancer into my body? What is the risk of that? With Hodgkin's, I understood that the risk was pretty small, so that became a minimal concern. The second main concern was having a healthy kid. And I had a lot of anxiety in my first pregnancy up until I had that confirmation live, but just knowing that, to know that it was going to be a healthy kid, and you never really know, but I had that anxiety around it being such a new procedure. With regards to how much of the tissue, I was told it was 1/3 to half. I think it ended up being half of the tissue was transplanted. I don't think that's a decision that I really cared about. I just wanted a healthy kid and my fertility back. So I think it was really, that was okay, how much do you transplant? How much will I have in the future? How long does it last? How do I know that it's working? How will I know when it stops working? Those are some of the questions that I had. And then how am I going to feel after the transplant? Again, it was a longer recovery than I was told. It was pretty painful. I was sore for a few weeks. And one of the things I think would have been nice to have a little bit of a heads up is some of the things that you can experience with the transplant. For me, I had night sweats you wouldn't believe. I had to change my clothes 2 to 3 times every evening for the first 4 months because the hormonal shift was just so strong, and that was how my body reacted.
So were you on hormone replacement therapy before and then you stopped at the time of transplant?
I was on birth control for a little while, but I had been off for a while before the transplant and before all of the IVF that I was trying.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, our next panelist is Whitney Gassmeyer. Whitney, can you share your story?
Hi. Okay, is this good enough? Can everybody hear me okay? My name's Whitney. I'm from Pittsburgh. I don't know. I'm so impressed that everybody kept it together, because I feel like one of the biggest things about being a cancer patient is that it feels like a violation when you get diagnosed, and you feel you lose a lot of agency, it seems. And if you don't show up for something, at least for me, I was told I wasn't being compliant, that kind of stuff. So it's weird to be here and feel like I have a voice a little bit, so I appreciate all the work that everyone here does. And, but anyway, so I got diagnosed with triple positive breast cancer in 2019, and I was 41. I was very quickly rushed, encouraged, however you want to say it, to begin treatment. And, this is not, I don't want to sound sexist, but none of the male providers that I saw offered any sort of fertility preservation to me. I saw one woman in the very beginning, and, one of the first things she said was, okay, well, you need to get on Zoladex. At that point, I had already, seen my chart notes. I had started researching this stuff, so I felt like I needed Zoladex. I needed to take time to make some decisions, first of all. But I'm grateful that she told me that, because then it allowed me, when I went for my, second and third and fourth and fifth opinions, to be able to say, these are things that are important to me and that I'd like to do. Regardless, fortunately I was sent to some reproductive endocrinologists, and I did the same thing where I got second and third opinions, and I was 41. I had 2 children already. My reserve looked low, my hormones looked bad. They were still willing to do stuff, but then I had my oncologist breathing down my neck about starting treatment. So with that pressure, and I remember, I think like Dr. Anderson and a couple other people shared that, the life, basically, how I remember when I Googled it was like the life of a follicle. And I was thinking, okay, well, this is what you're seeing under a microscope right now. But what if they could just like take my whole ovary? Because there's got to be stuff in there. So then I started Googling, do they ever take your ovary to do this? And then I found stuff. And while this was going, I found, Dr. Silber. But while this was going on, I, connected with the social worker at the hospital, and, she had given me a list of different organizations that help people with fertility preservation and whatever support during cancer. And then I found the Oncofertility Consortium, which up to this point I've been saying Consortium because I've only read it, I've never heard it. So I'm glad to, I was like Googling it really quick. I was like, oh shit, I don't want to say Consortium up here. But regardless, so then I found that, and I called, I called and I got Kristen Smith, who was such an angel to me, and I saw her out in the hallway and I started crying because I just think so highly of her, where everybody else was kind of like they didn't know the answers to things, she did. And she said, well, these are the people around you or within a couple states of you that do this, but because of your age, you're not going to be eligible for some of the studies, and or you're going to miss the cutoff point or whatever. And that's another thing that I feel like is really a crummy thing to hear as like, I was 41, and for years leading up to my diagnosis, I was having symptoms that I know now are like raging hormones, basically. I felt like I was on steroids all the time. So I was going to the doctor for years saying something is going on in my body, but nobody was hearing me. So then when I get diagnosed and it's, a hormone positive cancer, and all of this time leading up to it, they're saying, well, that's just, it was either like, you're too young for this, or that's just a part of getting old. And then when I got diagnosed, it was immediately like, you really think you want to have kids after this? Like, you're 41, I don't know, by the time you finish treatment, let's say you do 2 to 5 years of, hormone therapy, you're really going to do this. And then also mixed in with, you already have 2 kids, you need to stay alive for them, that kind of stuff. So I felt so rushed to start treatment, and I'm sorry I'm all over the place, but I was all over the place then. It's an all over the place story. And I felt scared to wait any longer. I felt scared to do any kind of retrieval, and I didn't think that there was good odds anyway. So I had gone back and forth with Dr. Silber's office. I did my first chemotherapy treatment, and then we flew out to Missouri, and I had my right ovary removed. And then I completed my treatment. I didn't actually complete it. I only did 4 cycles for, toxicity or whatever. But my oncologist would not give me Zoladex until my 4th and final treatment that I had. And that was very obnoxious to me. And then I had a lumpectomy. I found this clinical trial for a vaccine to prevent recurrence in HER2-positive breast cancer patients out in Seattle that I thought was really cool. So I went out there, and in the midst of that, of being in that trial last year, I got diagnosed with a recurrence. So this time it's, progesterone negative, lower estrogen positive, and still HER2 positive. But what allowed me to comfortably go on with chemotherapy and all of the crap that comes with that, and feeling alone and isolated, and for me, like, I had to fight for everything and find out all of my options on my own and sit around and brainstorm, like, if I were a science person, what would I think was a good idea to do, because I don't have any kind of background like that, and it was exhausting. But having my ovary removed, and it's still in Missouri, having that removed gave me peace of mind and allowed me to feel like, even if I never decided to use it, that there was still like hope out there, and that all of my choices weren't stripped from me, And I talked to a lot of young women that are diagnosed and they're in their mid-20s, and a lot of them are not offered any sort of fertility preservation, not because of the fault of the reproductive community. Just to clarify, it comes from, their prescribing oncologists basically not informing them of their options. And I think it's really scary because then they end up going through years of IVF and other treatments and just being so sad, and so I feel like there's so many good things in this community, but it's almost like we don't always hear about that from when we see our oncologists or when we see our surgeons, And I think, at least on that side, sometimes I think there can be a sort of bias as far as, again, I was 41. What do I need? What business do I have having any more children? So it made it harder for me, and I felt like options that maybe a younger person would have, I wasn't told about. So anyway, I think that's pretty much it for me.
Well, thank you all very much. And I'd like to open it up for anybody in the audience who might want to ask questions to the panelists, but also to Danya's point, you may have questions of each other too, because you're part of a community. Yes, please.
Yes. Hi, I'm Wasim Shmaitali from Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. So among my practice, I see children who are cancer survivors. And one of the more difficult parts of what I do is counseling adolescents about the risk of fertility and infertility. And because you have to think of what they know, what they're ready to hear, and what's the best time. And so, Mr. Shu, I wanted to ask you about your journey. How was this approached with you? And if this was to happen again, how would you want it to be done?
Sure. I was very fortunate that throughout my entire journey, I had just the most supportive family with me, parents that went to every appointment with me and helped make a lot of the hard decisions that I really wasn't ready to make at that age. So me being here, speaking with you in this community, I really owe it to my parents' decisions. They could not have made a better decision. If I were put back in those shoes with the knowledge I have now, it would be the same decision I would make. I agree on your point. It is definitely very difficult for kids to grasp the severity of that, especially on top of the fact of just getting diagnosed with cancer. I think that finding different ways to not necessarily soften the blow, but explain it in a way that they can understand, but also in a way that can enable their parents to help them understand and kind of make a group decision. I think that's the best approach for that.
Can you remind us how old you were when your testicular tissues were frozen?
Yeah, I think I was 11, if I recall correctly.
Can I add something to that? I know I was not a pediatric patient. I was 24, but even then, nobody was talking to me about sexual health. Like, I was in a relationship at the time, and I had to find the nurse in the chemo, during infusions, while my mom went to the bathroom to ask her about sexual health with my partner, because it was not discussed. And same while I was having a stem cell transplant, I remember a social worker came and she felt so awkward talking to me. I was like, wow, you need to be trained on how to have these discussions, because it's I'm 25, I'm sexually active. Why is nobody talking to me about what I'm able to do and not do after stem cell transplant? So I do think that there needs to be better training and discussion around that as well.
First, I want to thank all of you for sharing your incredible stories and for inspiring all of us. And I would like to think that some of the practices have changed across the country since you've all gone through this. But Dana, I had a question for you. Did insurance pay for your reimplantation? We're asked this all the time.
Great question. No. So even for my ovarian tissue freezing, it was $15,000 out of pocket. As a 24-year-old, that was a lot of money. I was very fortunate to have a grandma who sponsored that surgery for me. When I was looking at the ovarian tissue reimplantation, and I flew for 2 different consults, for one I was quoted $6,000, and for the other I was quoted $200,000. So there is not really a standard, I would imagine, in terms of what physicians and hospitals might be charging for these surgeries, depending on the techniques. It was not covered by surgery, but I also felt very fortunate because Dr. Silber waived all of his fees, and the only thing I was paying for was the hospital fees, and they were about $5,000 or $6,000, so something that we could afford. That was huge. If it cost $200,000, I would be in major debt.
All right, just echoing what everyone else said, thank you so much. This is always the highlight of these conferences for us, and so really, really appreciate you guys just authentically sharing your stories. My question is, I think for those of you who have been sitting in this room and listening to the talks, as you can see, we are learning a lot together. There's a lot that we don't know, and the research in some areas is outpacing other areas, but there's just a lot of gaps, and we're hoping to learn them. How do we, as clinicians and researchers, talk to you all with both transparency about what we don't know, but also without provoking a lot of fear of the fact that there is so much that we don't know? Do you have any advice about that?
I guess, of course, every patient is different. There's some people who will say, they implicitly trust their doctors and they'll just take whatever information they give them. So if they say this doesn't work right now or we don't know, that's okay. I prefer to have more information, and I'd like to know why. You want to take? There was something else I was going to say, but I just blanked out. But I think. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. I'll come back if I can think of it. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say honesty. I mean, I was told this is new, we don't know, and that's just the reality. I probably would have liked to be presented with all of the data that I found through academic publications. Like, I'm intelligent enough to understand and read through it and understand what the different techniques are. I did my own reading on slow freezing versus vitrification. What did they use in my case? I think just presenting the data and being really honest about what we know and what we don't know. I think a huge gap in care is connecting patients going through these procedures with some sort of psychosocial or mental health support, whether that's through a peer-to-peer program and connecting them to other people that have been through the procedure, or just connecting them to, I worked with a psychologist that specialized in infertility, and just being connected to somebody that took my insurance, that was an infertility therapist that I could speak to and really navigate a lot of the emotional issues as I was kind of going through my infertility journey was really, really powerful. Being connected to infertility support groups was really powerful, and feeling less alone. I think that just that piece would be good. I don't think that if you just share all of what you know and what you don't know, I don't necessarily think that would instill fear. The fear will be there regardless. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? That would just be my advice, is just present what you have and opportunities to connect or be part of registries to build the research going forward.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, one of the connections between all of us that I heard is we all Googled. So if we're not being, the young adult cancer movement has been pretty incredible, and a lot of it has been connection between us due to the internet and our comfort in using the internet. I find it pretty ironic when people say, don't Google your symptoms. And I understand that to a certain extent, but like I self-diagnosed via Google. And it was a weird thing to type into Google, like a hard testicle and pain in my chest. And the very first thing that came up is you have testicular cancer. And I had gone from January of 2011 to May of 2011 ignoring symptoms, and a Google search finally made me then ask Megan if I should go to the doctor, and she was like, yeah. But I think the important thing to understand is, yes, we trust our oncologists and we trust our care team, but at the same time, we're communicating with one another too. And like one of the things we're trying to set up is a peer-to-peer support network. We have a private Facebook page for Worth the Wait grant recipients. They're talking to each other, we're talking to them. Honesty and open communication is extremely important, and if our care team is not doing that with us, we will find another care team.
I'm sorry. I remember what I was going to say. I'm so sorry. About as far as like how can we help you or work together, I think I was looking up clinical trials all the time. I was so interested in getting into a clinical trial, but I would take my information to my doctors and they would kind of like leaf through it and that was it. And if they weren't doing, and I've been to different hospitals and things, hospital networks, whatever, and if there wasn't a study that they were participating in, they wouldn't, even if they had knowledge of a study in another state or at another institution, they wouldn't inform me of it, So I found that to be frustrating. And when I went out to the trial in Seattle, the trial coordinator or whatever said, there's so many people that we could enroll in this, but we can't go seeking those people out. We can't go find them. Only the people that come to this institution are we able to offer that to them. So I feel like it would be so huge, and I don't know the laws or how this works or anything, but it would be so huge if there was more collaboration so that if your colleague, several states away is in conducting a trial, then you can refer your patients to it, and then the research gets done that much quicker,
Jay-Wen, did you have any thoughts in response to the last question?
Well, I think it's kind of what everyone's been saying here, kind of very on brand with honesty. It's forming an open dialogue between the medical practice and the patient side. The openness can lead to a lot of things, such as finding communities, finding different options, finding answers, and that really starts with just treating people as humans, not seeing them only as patients, as a case, but people that are going through something that is scary, it's tough, and it's unmapped for them. Yeah.
I couldn't help notice when you all were telling your stories that Danya said, somebody told me that they'd never done this before in a human patient, and I'm looking at you getting ready to do something that's never been done before in a human patient.
I won't make him run away.
So I'm just wondering, how that makes you feel, and is there a level of trepidation with that? Because certainly you won't have that advantage.
Yeah, there definitely is anxiety behind it, but all of the medical professionals I've worked with within this progress, Dr. Org included, we've had that open dialogue, and at this point, there's trust. Dr. Org's been very clear that this is new, and like we were saying, how I was saying, I'm very new to this. We understand that we're all in the same boat together on this. So it's kind of, instead of me taking a step forward and doctors taking notes, it seems like we're all taking a step forward together. So it's exciting.
Please.
Thank you all for coming and talking with us and for your open and honest answers to our questions. I'm a pediatric gynecologist, and sometimes it feels to me like I'm trying to help patients or their families predict what they might want, or at least what options they might want in the future. And one thing that has come up is people saying when people are in the survivorship period, they don't want to go back into medical treatment for things. They want to be as far away as possible from anything to do with doctors or the hospital. And I'm just curious for you, your experiences with having to, go back into medical treatment or surgical treatment to use the tissue that you had stored. What was that like for you?
That's a great question. So I think that, I've definitely talked to a good share of cancer patients that have actually considered something like ovarian tissue freezing, where it just feels too overwhelming. It's just another procedure. It's another cost. It's more travel. It is overwhelming. I talked to a patient during COVID where she was worried to fly because she was already immunosuppressed in COVID and her parent couldn't come with her, and it was just too much. In my personal situation, because I wanted it so bad, I wanted to have my own biological kids if I could so badly, that wasn't a deterrent, but it definitely brought back a lot of memories that I didn't want to have come back, right? I knew that I was going through all of these treatments because of my cancer that I had, 7 years back. And so it was very present that it was because of that. And so that was, again, why I think having a therapist to work with was so critical for me, to kind of work through all of those emotions and memories and PTSD from the cancer treatment. If this is different, and it's going to, I'm not sick, I'm okay. This is a different sort of medical treatment. So yeah, that's all I have to say, just based on my experience.
Thank you. So Rachel, and before you ask your question, you standing there gives me the opportunity to introduce you to everybody here. So Rachel's the clinical administrator for our Center for Reproduction and Transplantation. So she's the one to make sure we follows all the rules correctly and dot the I's, cross the T's, get our IRB protocols approved, and et cetera. So
I do my best. So first of all, thank you all for sharing with us today. This question goes to Mike. I think you had mentioned that both times that you banked, neither time it sounds like you were counseled on the potential end use for the specimens. And had you been counseled on that, would that have changed your, would you have made a different choice and potentially banked additional specimens?
I probably would have banked additional specimens, which is ironic because I wasn't going to even do it in the first place. But I think Megan and I oftentimes say, and this goes back to the communication, we just wish people would have told us things, right? And, as a cancer survivor, I say to a lot of the people that I mentor, at least in my experience, I got very comfortable living in what I call the gray. And what I mean by that is you can see the world as it's black or white, and the gray area is kind of that unknown. And, when I was going through cancer, you don't necessarily know what the end game is. You trust and you hope, but I got comfortable living in that uncertainty. But I think that's, if someone just says, hey, listen, this potentially is going to be a very long process, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and we can try to work with insurance companies to get this covered. There's things we can do. At the very least, I'm prepared for it, and it's not a giant punch in the gut when you're finished with cancer and you're ready to move on, and then all of a sudden, it feels like people are telling you, in this case, the insurance companies, you're not a good investment. And, here's the thing, if we really look at the dollars and cents, my child isn't an investment. I don't care how much money we spent. Don't care at all. I don't look in his eyes and think, man, you were an expensive kid. He is an expensive kid, but that's after the fact. He loves Squishmallows, it's insane. But, that's one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing, because it makes me incredibly angry the way the United States system is set up, that we have insurance companies essentially saying this is not a good investment and we're not going to give you money for it. So logically, if someone would have come to us and said, well, I mean, and I'm not a doctor, so don't get mad at me when I quote these statistics that I'm making up. You know, IVF has a 20% success rate or whatever based on how old you are, that kind of thing. Like, shoot, I'm not going to spend a lot of money for a 20% chance of success. You flip that on its head, 80% of the time it's not going to work. Yeah, it's a bad investment. But at the same time, it's not, because it's quality of life, and we have absolutely zero regrets.
So if there are no more questions from the floor, you all clap, but let's clap again for all of our panelists. Thank you so much.